The UN Security Council meets to discuss the recently failed attack on Venezuela. Mexico City will begin easing lockdown measures from June 1st. And thousands of U.S. residents have been evacuated after 2 Michigan dams breached. Hello, welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez and this is From the South. A meeting of the United Nations Security Council took place virtually to discuss the mercenary incursion into Venezuela on May 3rd. The meeting was convened by the Russian Federation. The Venezuelan government reiterated the participation of governments of Colombia and the United States in a coup attempt, which he said had vast evidence on. Venezuelan ambassador to the United Nations, Samuel Moncada, thanked Russia for its support to denounce the events before the Security Council. And during this meeting, the Russian representative spoke and noted that Venezuela's civic-military union had been key to frustrating the attempted incursion.
I want to indicate from the outset that the situation we are facing today is unfolding around Venezuela, not inside the country. The recent incidents of breach of Venezuela's sovereignty by foreign agents pose a direct threat to the country's peace, as well as to regional security and stability. We would like to question what role neighboring Colombia had in this story. It's hard to imagine that this clandestine operation that originated on its soul was conducted without any knowledge about it. US authorities claim that they have nothing to do with this. We would be glad to believe them, but fail to explain that according to the contract, 2 American citizens were planning to take hostage of legitimate Venezuelan president and bring him to the US. For what purpose, may I ask?
Today, in the middle of a deadly pandemic that is affecting all of humanity and which requires the full attention of our national government to protect the life of our people, we are facing an imminent armed attack that, for its genocidal effects, amounts to a crime against humanity. Given the seriousness of the situation and its potential escalation, the inaction of the Security Council at the current juncture will embolden those governments to continue with the warmongering and criminal plans. It is a fact that the Colombian and the United States governments have doubled down their aggression against Venezuela in contempt for international law and the UN Charter, in a demonstration of their unrepentant and recidivist nature. Allow me to conclude, Mr. President, by insisting that our country does not represent a threat to anyone and expects that everyone learns the following lesson. Venezuela is not for sale. It will never be a colony of anyone. And our people, with serenity and determination, will fulfill its duty to be free.
The mayor of Mexico City has announced plans to gradually reopen economic and social activity starting from June 1st.
We want to create a balance between avoiding hospital saturation, but at the same time create better conditions so that families can generate once again an income and the social and educational life in the city and the country. Sooner than later, we will be able to return to our activities without putting our health at risk. We are a city that has faced challenges, tragedies, and that has always faced them together responsibly and above all, freely.
The first plane carrying deported Mexican migrants has left the United States and arrived to Mexico City. Several planes will take 133 migrants who tried to enter the United States back to their country. 4 planes will leave the border city of San Diego, California, and another 4 from Brownsville, Texas. The Foreign Minister of Mexico said they are seeking to repatriate them with dignity, safety, and in order, and will also take COVID-19 testing for all. Brazil has seen its deadly day yet due to COVID-19, with 1,179 deaths registered in the past 24 hours. Many citizens say the government of Jair Bolsonaro has failed them.
How can a government that has been in power for 1 year and 4 months solve a 20-year problem? solved 20 years of dismantling, of lack of investment in health. Everything is wrong in this country, starting with the politicians themselves, the Congress, the Senate. Everything has to be thrown away.
I agree with social distancing. I am not against it, but this should have been on the program before.
Our correspondent, Brian Mir in Sao Paulo, has the latest update on the situation.
Last night, the Brazilian Federal Health Ministry announced that the number of confirmed coronavirus cases in Brazil had climbed to 257,000. In terms of absolute numbers, this now puts Brazil ranked at number 3 in the world. And with the death count rising by over 1,000 for the first time since the pandemic began in one 24-hour period, at 17,000 now, Brazil is ranked 6th in the world in terms of deaths from coronavirus. This discrepancy between confirmed cases and deaths implies that there's a lower mortality rate here. And one of the reasons for that might be that they've started rolling out the use of anticoagulants in the São Paulo municipal public health system after scientists at USP University discovered that some of the patients who were dying in intensive care were dying because of blood clots forming in the microveins of their lungs. Brazil has just lost 2 national health ministers in less than a month, both of them resigning out of arguments with far-right President Bolsonaro. He continues to insist that the solution for the pandemic is to send everybody back to work and just give out free hydrochloroquine at the local public health clinics. Meanwhile, luckily for the citizens of Brazil, the governors keep ignoring Bolsonaro's orders. Lockdown is intensifying in São Paulo, which is home to 20% of Brazil's population and also the epicenter for virus transmission. There's nothing that the president is doing that is helping, but luckily we have governors and mayors in different states across Brazil that are not paying any attention to him.
That was Brian Mir from Brazil. Also in Brazil, demand for airlifts for COVID-19 patients has tripled in the Amazon state capital, Manaus, in recent days. Airlifting patients from rural towns that are often hundreds of kilometers away from the capital is a risky and complex task, only justified by the lack of supplies and intensive care units in the region. But small planes can only carry 1 serious patient at a time, or 2 if the second one has moderate symptoms, delaying the necessary relocation of patients who now have to join a waiting list. The Amazon state has now more than 22,000 COVID-19 cases and over 1,400 deaths.
If you leave a patient who is intubated in the remote areas, many cities don't have ventilators. The medical team must do manual ventilation on the artificial manual breathing unit for 2 days, 3 days, 3 nights without stopping. To try and find a solution to this, we airlift the patients, but sometimes it is not recommended to transfer the patients due to the seriousness of the case. If we leave them there, they would die, so we need to transfer them from a situation of 0 chance and try to give some opportunity to live throughout its transfer.
On Tuesday, the president of Ecuador, Lenín Moreno, announced a latest string of austerity measures in response to the economic crisis caused by the pandemic. Let's have a look.
Reducing working hours for teachers and public officials, public institutions being shuttered, including state media outlets and the national airline, and the closure of a number of diplomatic buildings abroad are just some of the latest austerity measures announced by President Lenín Moreno.
We'll cut back $4 billion in public spending, cut $980 million in salaries, liquidate institutions to save $400 million, freeze spending to the cost of $1.3 billion, and will renegotiate our debt for $1.3 billion in interest.
This economic package has caused great rejection by citizens, among them from indigenous communities that say the country has been completely turned over to neoliberalism.
From the Organization of Indigenous Peoples, we have decided to prepare to mobilize once the mandatory quarantine is lifted. The orders, for which stand in place until May 31st. We are organizing along with workers to take social action. We cannot allow for the rights to workers to be abolished like they have been.
Economic experts say these measures will affect the country's income and will force everyday citizens to pay for the damage caused by the increases in the foreign debt.
Our dollarization is being put at risk because due to the global economic collapse, we're not going to see income. What has happened so far this year is circumstantial, so we must stop currency from leaving the country, reduce the amount of imports from the private sector, and stop paying external debt. But this is impossible, according to this government. They do the opposite.
Ecuador. Nonetheless, workers' unions say that these new laws undermine their rights, and despite mobilizations against the laws, the government continues to ignore the people.
We're taking a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back. Let's continue with news. In Peru, a group of nurses and hospital workers have protested in Lima, demanding personal protective equipment in hospitals amid the COVID-19 pandemic. This is not the first time workers of the Hipólito Unanue hospital have taken to the streets to decry the lack of equipment in the establishment. They have staged various protests throughout April and May, as the government has so far sent only limited amount of protective gear and other medical supplies. The total number of cases in Peru has crossed 100,000, while more than 3,000 people have died of the disease.
It's like a horror movie. Inside, it looks like a graveyard. Patients die in their chairs, in wheelchairs, in regular chairs.
We want all the personnel to be swabbed for COVID-19. They have not been swabbed for more than a month. It will be more than 2 months now.
Colombian President Iván Duque extended mandatory quarantine measures and introduced new ones to stem the spread of COVID-19. The country reports almost 17,000 cases and 613 deaths due to the virus.
The health emergency we have declared until May 31st will be extended until August 31st. The borders remain closed. No intermunicipal transport is allowed.
In Chile, about 80 Colombian citizens, including women and children, have set up camps outside the country's consulate in Santiago, calling for help to return to Colombia. Squeezed into 15 tents, the Colombian citizens say they want to return to their country after losing their jobs in Chile because of the coronavirus. Colombians make up one of the largest migrant communities in Chile, with around 146,000 Colombians living in the country, mostly in the capital, Santiago.
We have a group of 95 people here who want to return to our country, and there is no humanitarian flight, nothing, and no response from the government, no response from the foreign ministry, no response at all.
We are in the street, in the open air. We are cold because winter is beginning. We are afraid it will rain because we were told it would rain today, and we have nowhere to take shelter.
In other news, Burundi is heading to the polls to elect a successor to President Pierre Nkurunziza, who has ruled the country with impunity for the last 15 years. Poll workers in Bujumbura assure transparency, as the vote is one of the most important transfers of power in Burundi since independence in 1962. Meanwhile, the government has been criticized for not taking the pandemic seriously. People were seen crammed at lines before voting, and only a few wore face masks.
As you can see, everything is in order, and we expect everything to move along freely and fairly during this election process.
We are not afraid because the organizers did not require us to distance 1 meter. As they did not require, they saw that God is with us.
Benin held local elections on Sunday despite the coronavirus pandemic. Hand sanitizers in polling stations, and voters were obliged to wear face masks. Let's have a look.
This is the Abomoye Kalavi polling station in Benin's capital, Cotonou. Despite the threat posed by the coronavirus in the West African nation, voters have come out to cast their ballots as they seek to exercise their choice in local leaders. To them, COVID-19 is just but one of many problems that they want to be addressed.
I live in Cotonou. Our commune needs a mayor who can fulfill the desires of citizens. We dream of building infrastructure such as markets, roads and many others, so that Cotonou becomes a major player in the sub-region.
What we can expect from our elected representatives is development of Cotonou, our capital. I will still like the problems we have, especially flooding, social problems and development problems, to be a top priority of the elected representatives.
In an effort to minimize the spread of the virus, the Electoral Commission and other partners have put hand sanitizers at strategic points. Voters are also wearing face masks.
I would like to thank the Autonomous National Election Commission, SENA, not to say the government, which did everything possible to ensure that the vote was held without contamination by the coronavirus. The vote this Sunday, May 17th, will not be an open door to the spread of COVID-19.
Up to 5.4 million registered voters cast their ballot. The voter turnout is still considered a little lower than expected. 5 political parties are battling it out as they seek to control over 1,800 municipalities across the country. As the vote counting gets underway, the West African nation awaits the outcome.
We have more news after this short break. Don't go away. Thank you for joining us again. In the United States, thousands of residents have been evacuated in Michigan after 2 dams breached following heavy rains. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer declared a state of emergency in Midland County, the site of the breached dams in Edenville and Sanford. According to local media, it was unclear whether there were any fatalities caused by the flooding, but relief and evacuation efforts are being compounded by the coronavirus pandemic.
To go through this in the midst of a global pandemic is almost unthinkable. But we are here, and to the best of our ability, we are going to navigate this together. So please, to the best of your ability, continue to wear a face covering when you go to a shelter or go stay with a friend or relative. Please try to protect yourself if you are able.
The powerful cyclone Amphan has begun dumping rain on coastal India and Bangladesh, as more than 2 million people were evacuated before the storm is set to make landfall on Wednesday afternoon. With wind speeds of up to 170 kilometers per hour, the storm could cause extensive damage, including pushing seawater 25 kilometers inland and possibly flooding crowded cities like Calcutta in India. Both India and Bangladesh are attempting to evacuate millions to safety, but the rescue and relief operations are hampered by the pandemic.
We have helped children and families move away from these households into government-provided shelters. Also, one must remember that this being the COVID-19 period, even bringing them into government shelters is becoming very difficult because of physical distancing that people need to maintain. So we cannot have the government shelters filled up at 100% level. We can only do to a level of 30 to 40%, etc. So that's what we have been able to do in terms of preparedness. It's a bit unnerving, to be very honest. I mean, it's not your usual storm that it's going to happen and then it's going to be over. It's not one of those. And
the Spanish Parliament has voted to extend the lockdown for another 2 weeks. The restrictions will remain in force until June 6th. The measure has allowed the government to impose a strict lockdown on Spain's nearly 47 million people population to fight the epidemic, which has now claimed nearly 28,000 lives in the country. But the management of the crisis has drawn a barrage of criticism from right-wing parties who have denounced its brutal confinement. Meanwhile, several hundred protesters have hit the streets demanding Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez's resignation. Greece will restart its tourism season on June 15 in a key boost to the economy after the virus lockdown.
The tourist season begins on June 15, the date from which seasonal hotels can open, and from July 1st, direct international flights to our tourist destinations will gradually commence. Sample tests will be administered to our visitors, and our general health procedures will be enforced. But let's face it, in April and May, tourism was at its nadir. What we achieve this year will be a bonus. And I reiterate, the priority is to protect jobs and to help professionals in the industry to prepare for their big comeback in 2021.
In China, a man kidnapped as a toddler 32 years ago has been reunited with his biological parents. Mao Yin was just 2 when he was snatched outside a hotel in Xi'an in Shanxi province while his father stopped to get some water on the way home from a nursery. His parents had never given up on finding him, and his mother quit her job to search for his son, distributing more than 100,000 flyers across the country. The now 34-year-old Mao was located in Sichuan province by the police, which acted on a tip-off that a person students have returned to class as the country began reopening schools after a delay of more than 2 months due to the coronavirus. Students in Seoul lined up for temperature checks and were given sanitizer to wash their hands. Under the new sanitation rules, students and teachers must wear masks except at mealtime and clean their desks, which will be spaced 1 meter apart. But returning to schools didn't go without a hitch everywhere. In the city of Incheon, 2 students tested positive for COVID-19. To resume.
It's really exciting to meet my friends and teachers face to face, but we have to strictly follow the disinfected guidelines in order to prevent the spread of COVID-19. I am very worried, but it's still nice to see them
in their classrooms. And when students build friendships during the coronavirus pandemic, we have at least been able to continue classes online through remote encounters.
And with that, we end our news brief. But you can find these and more stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to follow health protocols where you are. For Telesur English,